I think, Jim, we've had the opportunity to talk about today's topic, and I appreciate you bringing it up. I think it touches all of us. And I think all of us would probably choose to not have it touch us if we were able to control it, and that's resentment. And I think that one of the things that we've done before that I'd like to do now is just read the definition, because I think it brings context to everything we're about to say, some of which we know and some of which is just going to happen. Resentment is a complex, multi-layered emotion that has been described as a mixture of disappointment, disgust, and anger. Other psychologists consider it a mood or as a secondary emotion that can be elicited in the face of insult and or injury. Inherent in resentment is a perception of unfairness and a generalized defense against unfair situations. So I know that we both have a couple of stories that are just a little too personal to share. Apologies to the audience for that, but I think that's good judgment on our part. Sometimes there are just boundaries. But, when you brought the topic up and shared your story with me, I started, and then I read the definition to both of us. I think we both kind of got a bunch of ideas about what that is, why it shows up in our lives, and how we handle it. But I don't know, Jim, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I think that one of the reasons that, first of all, I appreciate you reading the definition, because it really points out those areas, those emotions that are triggered when resentment is there. As you said, we have our own stories, but I believe that our whole program and our whole podcast is about ourselves, right? Self-awareness, self-evaluation, self-alignment, our self-confidence, our self-worth. All that starts in the middle. Mm-hmm. And then it radiates out to these 5 areas of our life, right? Mm-hmm. Which we talk about: our careers, our relationships with others, men, women, our relationship with money, our relationship with our career, our health, our worldviews. It all starts with that. So when this, particular incident happened, there was a lot of triggers going off, and then I had to stop and do a self-evaluation. Why was this such a painful event, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't. Well, that's it goes back to resentment is something that we have when we do something that we regret doing. And I think it does go back to our childhood. I really do. Relationships and things that we haven't taken the time to really understand why it becomes so personal. But I also believe it's resentment is you're mad at yourself, and that we look for other people to push that out to, or to blame that on, when really you always have to look at yourself first, right? Like where does that come from?
Yeah, I think you don't have to, but I think you should.
Yeah, and I think most don't, but it's
I think most don't, and that's why I think self-awareness is such an important thing, because your recovery from hardship, your recovery from argument, your recovery from negative events it begins with self-awareness. It begins with this idea that if resentment is in part a feeling of unfairness, well, the world's not fair. It never has been. Life is not fair.
Right.
And so an expectation of fairness is kind of a fool's errand, And so I think the most important thing, in my humble opinion, about what you just said is your initial and instinctive response was, how much of this is about me, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like, maybe you blame someone or something for a minute, but you don't wallow in that. I've never known you to wallow in that. I don't wallow in that. I think we all resent. I think that's a natural reaction to certain situations and circumstances. And I think depending on the severity and the depth of that, we might hang on to it for a little while longer. But I feel like, I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like my immediate response to anything bad or unfair is, how could I have kept that from happening? What was my responsibility for that? And how can I ensure that that won't happen again?
Yeah.
And that's not a perfect science, but I think it's a great first move.
Yeah, I agree. And resentment also, again, is being mad at yourself as much as being trying to blame others for what happened. And once you get clear on what that is, then you can deal with it. But that's always there, and it'll sneak up on you, and it'll make you do and feel ways that we're really trying to avoid, right? We're trying to avoid those uncomfortable feelings that remind us. And then when you live in regret, that's another thing I try to live by, right? I'd rather die trying than live in regret for not trying.
Oh yeah. No, that's really important. Well, let's dig in a little. I'll be transparent about a few things, some of which I've talked about before. My ex-wife and the whole process of going through this extended, brutal, manipulative, dishonest 7 to 10 year process, depending on what event you're calling the end. Arguably it's still going on because we have kids together. I resent,
Mark, not to interrupt you, but yeah, I think that's where some of this came from. I remember, and you have every right to, your frustrations with the habit that she still creates into your life. There is some justified resentment, but it is, how much of it is controlling us, right? Because we've empowered these other events and people that still control our emotions and our feelings.
You're giving your power and your happiness away to someone else. There's no question. It's much easier said than done. It makes me think of a time I said to a friend of mine, this is years ago now. He said something like, "How you doing?" I'm like, I'm having a struggle. I'm feeling bad that I'm not yet able to forgive her. And he started laughing, and he's like, "Dude, what you went through, I don't think you got to rush that process at all."
Yeah.
And I said, hey, thanks, man. That, as funny as that is, as true as it is, it's helpful. That kind of.
I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit on this one, Mark. So the resentment is not just for what she did, but don't you think, and I'm speaking for myself as much, I don't want to speak for you, that some of the resentment comes from what you didn't do to respond to what she did?
Of course. Yeah, of course. I think but I would be careful in saying that I did think for quite some time that I could change her.
So maybe you're mad at yourself for believing that you could change her, and then realizing in the end that you couldn't change her. So there's resentment is, I think, is a self-reflection, right?
Of course. Yeah, no, there's definitely, I mean, the circumstances that brought us together were, we got pregnant and we weren't married. And would I have married her eventually if that were not the case? We'll never know. But if I had to guess, I'd say probably not. But there was a lot there. There was a lot of good stuff there. What was there that I didn't really understand because I didn't grow up in that environment. She came from a very, very broken home, and has an adult chosen not to reflect, not to be self-aware, not to reflect, not to work on herself. She's chosen the path of blame me, blame other things, blame other people. So
most people do. Most people, that's what they do. They get their finger pointer out and they point at everybody to blame them on them. And those are the worst people to be around.
They're just difficult to be around, and I choose not to be around them. So, but we ended up with three beautiful children that I have wonderful relationships with. There's so much, and that's what if I feel any resentment lingering, because what happens now, as I've told you before, is she'll interact with my children in a negative capacity once every couple of years or 10 years or whatever. It long time it doesn't happen. Then it happens. They get their hopes up, and then she abandons them again. And I can't help but be resentful of that. But I also recognize, like any resentment, I'm not hanging on to this. I don't have space for this. I want to be grateful. I want to be happy. I want to be productive. I want to be helping other people. I want to be contributing, and resentment gets in the way of all of that, right? All of it. So I've had, my mother took her own life. I was resentful of that.
Well, that's where actually I was gonna. I don't want to go too much on a deep dive on you personally, because there's plenty to go around here. But I wanted to ask you how much of that resentment could be related to other relationships you've had. I know that's I think I mentioned that to you, right? These go back to relationships into childhood, and of course they're related to your mother or your women important women in our lives that that maybe is built up resentment that then we take out, justified or unjustified, fairly or unfairly, on other people. I think that's a human thing. We all do that, but it's back to yeah. So that's why I always like to refer to our 5 areas of life, right? The resentment. I'm very resentful right now of our politicians, because it's clear, particularly here in California, that they do the same things that have created a lot of these situations that we're in right now, especially crime after the George Floyd incident and so on and so on. You could just see how they just didn't enforce the laws. We have homelessness. There's a lot of resentment. That's one area, worldview, right? And then in other words, yeah, there's professional resentments, right? That deals that didn't go through or did. I definitely have some of that with some of my licensing deals.
I remember the story you told about going in on a sales call and your boss
big time.
lying about something, and you're like, and you I can't remember the specifics, but I know that you were resentful of that for a little while.
I am. That's still to this day. You know what I resent? Like I told you, of letting him get away with it. I'm more resentful about, not that he did it, that I had let him get away with it, because I wanted the money. I wanted the commissions. I didn't want to give up that role, but that's a great example, Mark, of resentment. Do I resent him for doing it? No, I resent myself more for allowing him to do that, because that's not who I am. It goes to the core of what I don't believe in it. And I think the number one thing you do is give another human being his dignity. And when you have people like that, you have to eliminate them at all costs. So that's a great
dignity
one.
is a big deal. Yeah, no, I'm
huge part of it.
Actually,
I'm glad you mentioned that, because you're right. I think resentment and dignity go together more than I realized, because that's what somebody threatens your dignity.
Yeah. It's a sticky wicket, as they would say. But yeah, I think that this whole idea of unfairness as part of resentment is a very, very interesting kind of subset of the word. But politics, man, it's very difficult not to be resentful right now, what's going on. But I think that the thing that I'm thinking of is, and we've talked about this a lot, it's the same context of, why do you vote? You're just one person. How are you going to have an impact on that? Mark, why do you speak up about that in disagreement? Because you're not going to change that person's mind, right? But it's like, well, but if I see bad things happening and I don't do anything, am I not going to be resentful at some point?
Yeah, it's a good point.
So that's why I speak up. I think it's as much for my own self-preservation as it is for anything else.
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency. Yeah. How about resentment around? Again, I'm going around our wheel, and I'm hitting all these areas. Worldview, health, our health. Resentment in our mental health, physical health, resentment in our profession, resentment with money, and resentment with people. And I think that's what this one is about. Our people, as in men, women, mother, wife, daughter, so on and so on. But what are your resentments in regards to, say, money? Do you have resentments? I think
sure. I mean, I lost all my money in a divorce, and I, for a long time, thought to myself, you should have hid some, man. You should have hid some. And people told me I should have, and they told me I should. And I couldn't get myself to do it, because I'm not a criminal. I'm not a dishonest person.
Yeah.
And when I think about that.
So what do you resent then?
Sometimes I resent the fact that I didn't.
Yeah.
And sometimes I resent being put in that situation. Right. Yeah. I resent being taken advantage of. Yeah. And because there were a lot of areas in that contentious divorce where you have to make a decision in a very emotional state, typically with a significant amount of anger coupled with a significant amount of fear. And as you well know, that's a bad place to be making big decisions. So I resent not firing my attorney right after he said, just give her the house. She's going to get it anyway. I'm like, huh? You know, I just didn't
Interesting.
have, I mean, in hindsight, I didn't make that decision to intervene because I didn't know what was happening. I had no
Yeah.
benchmark of experience to say which would be good. Well, what ended up happening is I lost the house because we gave it to her,
Yeah.
and maybe she would have got it anyway. But I think I
But
probably would have
but
at least
here's the
given
question, and I'll
consideration.
share my attorney story as far as resentment for attorneys that you paid for advice, right?
Yeah,
Do
a
you
lot of
think you
money.
you resent the attorney because maybe deep down inside you knew the advice he wasn't giving you wasn't right, and you took it anyway? I think that happens a lot, right? Where your innate feeling at that moment is one thing, and then you get persuaded by somebody else to
Mm-hmm.
change your position, and I'm resentful. That's very relevant to the story I was sharing with you, before the call. I think there's, when you mention attorney, I hired a patent attorney one time for a big deal, and it was the worst advice I ever got. How
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get a check or something. I've also hired some attorneys to give me some great advice, right?
Yeah.
But that fucking guy had no idea what he was doing, and I took the advice. Because here's, I think, another one that becomes this kind of all comes together is there. There's times when we're vulnerable, and I'm just using your case. You were in a position. You weren't in a position of strength, right? You were very vulnerable to what to do. So then you go to somebody, particularly an attorney you're paying a lot of money to, and you hope that they give you the best advice. And maybe they are from their perspective, but I can see your resentment for that on especially if you're paying somebody to give you good advice.
Well, here's the icing on that cake, and you know this part of the story, but I'll share it. I eventually did fire him.
Yeah, that's
But
right.
that was after I had lost everything. I was already,
Yeah.
in the poorhouse, as they say. But then I went into court as my own attorney, and I got sole custody of my kids.
Wow.
So, like,
That's
what
cool.
the
It's a
fuck?
cool. Yeah.
It is. That's a cool result, but
It's a
it took way longer than it should have. And I won't belabor that story, but there were too many people involved that just didn't have
yeah.
my children's best interests at heart. They were
Yeah.
they were protecting themselves or covering their ass, or and my children resent all of those experiences. They resent their mother. They resent all of those psychologists that we were forced to go in front of. They resented the process, and they'll spend their lives working on that. I don't think they're wallowing in it. I think we all talk about it, but resentment can often be a group thing.
Yeah. The more I think about it, it's advice that you took, that if you could do it over again, you wouldn't have trusted that person. And this also goes back to agency, and where you are giving up your agency to somebody else, maybe, and
Mm-hmm.
then you look back and go, I'll never do that again, or maybe you don't say I'll never do it again. You for many years you are very resentful about to those people, those situations. It also can make you jaded. It can make you.
Yeah, you got to be careful with that one.
You have to be very
I,
careful on
yeah,
all these things. I think that's why the word speaks to us in so many different ways, right?
yeah. It is multi-layered. You just have to be careful with that one. That can be, all this stuff, whether it's resentment or regret or any negative emotion. I think the sooner you can learn to, okay, I see what this is. I kind of understand why I'm feeling this way, but I'm not playing the blame game. This isn't going to make me bitter. I'm going to get better from this. I just have to, maybe I need a sec to take a breath, or a day or a week or whatever it is, but I'm going to pause and I'm going to come out the other side of this. And resentment is at the high end of one of those qualities. It just is. It's very, very,
I
very
think
difficult to avoid.
what you said reminds me. I mean, I mentioned too, I listened to the author of The Secret recently. She was being interviewed. She's older in her later years now, but obviously the book The Secret changed. Geez, at that time it was the number one selling book. It sold something like 12 million copies. But
Yeah.
I don't know if you read or went through the program or read the book, but it's there's a lot to it. It's still, I think, a very valuable way of living your life. But that was one of the things that she was saying, that people that it's good to get your problems out and deal with them. You don't want to suppress them. If you suppress your problems, they'll sneak up on you again later. Her whole thing was, no, when you have it, when a problem is really bothering you, don't try to forget about it, remove it, bring it to the surface, deal with it so you can get on with your life and not live in regret. And I think that speaks to what you're saying, that you have to process these things away. And if you don't, I do think that they haunt you later in life.
You know, it's interesting. I think that oftentimes as well, we can think we've been self-aware. We think we've addressed the issue. We think we've put it behind us because we process it. We recognize it. We absorb it. We do some self-talk about it to ourselves. Maybe we solicit the opinions of some people close to us, but that doesn't mean it's gone. You know,
that's right.
And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And the challenge is, I can't discern between the two. If I think it's gone and it's not gone, I didn't know that until whatever's going to trigger it later on comes down the road, you know? So I think all of this, Jim, whether it's the self-awareness, self-evaluation, the ego, you know, blame game, regret, resentment, all these things, I think they're all, if you can figure out a way to approach them all, to say, I want to figure out how to make myself aware when I'm in a particular state, a particular negative state like resentment. And I want to go, okay, well, maybe it was somebody else's fault. Maybe it was something else's fault, but I was involved in it and I didn't keep it from happening. So I'm not going to wallow in the guilt of that, but I'm going to address it and say, you know, you're forgiven. It might take a year. It might take a day. It might take an hour. It might take 5 years. I don't know. There's no time limit on it. But the notion that with all these negative emotions, including resentment, I'm going to go self-aware just by reaction. That's going to be my built-in reaction from now on for the rest of my life. And then I'm going to go, no, somebody else's fault or something else's fault doesn't serve you at all. Doesn't matter. There's nothing you can do about it. Whatever it is, it's done. Right. And then you create that space for something like gratitude or appreciation or some loving thought of some kind. You know, that's what I try to do. You know,
that's good stuff. I think what my takeaway was that it was an opportunity to make a promise to myself that if that situation, if that was scenario ever came up again, that I had already predetermined exactly what I would not do and what I will do. So then I don't have to worry about that. There's no anxiety. I know, and then I've shared the people around me. If that ever happens again, this is how I'm going to react. I hope you support me, but if you don't, that's okay too. You have to do what you have to do. But that's
well, you know, the decision that or the circumstance you described, as I said, both parties were in a state of fear. And just like anger, when you're in a state of fear, you don't make good decisions.
You don't.
You just don't. It's unfair to be expected to make an objective decision in a place of fear,
and unfair to judge other people because you can't appreciate their experiences at that time, right? They're doing what they know based on their past experiences. It doesn't mean they align with your values or with how you would deal with that.
I guess the other kind of cool thing to try and do is just what you said. It's like, okay, well, I can blame this person, or I can say, you know, like, what does that get me? That doesn't serve me. That doesn't do me any good. We're not making progress if I do that, you know? And if it's somebody that you love and that you spend a lot of time with, that's even more important. You know, I think the forgiveness and the discussion after the fact, like when both parties say, I'm sorry, and both parties say, I forgive you, and mean it, right? And mean it, because there's nothing worse than a conditional apology. I'm sorry, but, you know, fuck that. That's not an apology, you know?
I also think it takes some courage to bring those topics up in a non-confrontational way, right? It's not that you're you want to agitate the problem or add to the problem, but try to have a conversation because you care enough to share how you feel. So you give them the opportunity the next time to do it, to maybe handle it differently.
Yeah, I had an exchange with my son yesterday, and it was really eye-opening for me. And at the end of it, he deserved an apology, and I gave him one, but I didn't give him one immediately. And I think what I said was, okay, yeah, you're right, my bad. And that's as much of a language thing. It was a sincere apology, and it was an interesting chain of events. It brings our relationship closer. So something that started out as potentially negative became something that brought us a little closer. We talked kind of a little bit about it, and we'll talk about it some more.
I
But
think that looms over many relationships.
mm-hmm.
And again, whether you're aware or unaware of that, if you don't have those conversations in the right context. So again, you're not attacking them or blaming them. You're just saying, hey, I'd like to share this experience and this thought. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to ourselves and how we are able to take responsibility for our own actions. I think that's hard to do sometimes.
It is. And what I really resonates with me about what I just described yesterday is when I decided in my little monkey brain that I owed him an apology, I didn't immediately make one. There was this little voice in my head saying, fuck that. Fuck, yeah. I'm not doing that. I'm not making an apology. I don't care. That it was really interesting because I was conscious of what was going on, and I kind of was laughing after a little while. And I'm like, I think that feeling, fuck that, means you really should apologize.
Yeah. A little off topic, but we'll wrap up with this. But I somehow stumbled across this podcast. I heard the author talk about it, but the podcast is about Putin, the president of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating because it talks about his childhood. And the author or the producer of this show, she's Russian. I think her father was Russian, about the same age as Putin, and lived in the same neighborhood and have some commonalities as far as their childhood. But wow, what an amazing insight of how he became who he is, but also a whole side of story that we as Westerners, particularly Americans, don't have appreciation for. What happened after World War II and the amount of death that the Russians experienced. They have 10 times more deaths than any other country. It was, and then how he evolved, his experience of growing up in his neighborhood, and what created, the situation we're in right now. Not that I have more appreciation. So when you see his father was wounded in World War II, he lost his two brothers, and I think there's a lot of pain, and that resentment, comes out at other times of your life. And boy, is it coming out now. So that you talk about a man with a lot of resentment, and maybe justified, quite honestly, as sick as that may sound, doesn't justify the people he's killing, but he has been exposed to tremendous amount of pain and killing and
he's a broken man, and he chose to turn it into power and control, right, and win at all costs. And that's an understandable psychological observation. I still think it's a bad choice, but I understand why someone that went through such terrible, horrible stuff,
that's right,
so close over such a long period of time, and at such a young age it started, that guy more often than not is going to be fucked up. I think that most good, well-mannered, good-meaning people rarely come out of those circumstances. So again, not to condone it, but certainly I understand it,
Yeah, it was just fascinating because I haven't listened to the whole, all the episodes, but it was really more about his neighborhood and these really horrible conditions that he grew up and he lived in, and the dynamics and how you learn under those circumstances, the behaviors of people and so on. And that's how he sees everything. One of the last comment I'll make is, I guess he's a judo, black belt in judo, and judo it's not just a combat sport. It's a way of living. And one of the comments he makes is, in judo, it's you're using other people's leverage against them, but you're also the whole. I'm not an expert in judo, but my understanding is you're waiting for somebody's to show weakness. Once they show weakness, then you attack. And boy, that's exactly what he's doing to President Biden right now.
Yeah,
he waited
no
for his weakness, and he's striking like an animal. He's
the timing
going
of
for the neck. When he saw American get weak, he struck, and he will not lose that opportunity, because that's just,
it's an interesting topic, and maybe it's a topic for another. It's certainly not for this podcast, but it's interesting how some people don't understand that concept, that number one, there are evil people. That is a reality, right? And number two, when a bully pushes on you, if you don't push back, he's going to push harder the next time. If you get your quarter for lunch money on day one, he's coming for 50 cents tomorrow. That's human nature. That's what bullies do, right? So maybe we can talk about that on another podcast.
We will. Yeah, sounds good.
All right, Jim, that was fun. That was good. I like this one.
All
right, we'll catch up with you next week.
Sounds good.
Thanks, man.